Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. I am here with the first challenge over at the Counterfeit Kit Challenge design team, and we are challenged to use watercolor. And this time I'm going to do a watercolor resist technique. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start with the story I'm going to tell. I had recently gotten a stash of old things from my parents, and this was a photo of me in my 5th grade class, and I pointed out my best friend Stephanie there, and this brought back some memories, so I wanted to go ahead and tell this story. I am going to start with a title that uses a watercolor resist, and I'm going to do that on top of patterned paper, and we'll see how this all pulls together in a minute. In the meantime, I have my counterfeit kit with me, and I'm trying to choose papers, and I choose this peachy polka dot because it totally reminds me of the peachy school folders from the 80s, and so that is why I chose that piece of paper. And then I brought out some supporting papers and supplies to go with it. Here I am trying to decide how to do my title. What I'm going to do is create my own stencil. I am using alpha dies to create a title stencil, and I'm going to trim it down to size just so I can better center it, because I want to make a banner out of this title when I'm done. So after I get it centered, I'm going to go ahead and tape it down, and that's going to mask off the sides because I'm going to ink this up with Versamark ink. That is my heat embossing ink of choice, and I'm going to heat emboss this with clear. What that means is we'll still see that pattern below the title, and I'm going to watercolor wash over that title so the background paper will become a darker watercolored color and the letters will stay the actual pattern of the paper, which is a very subtle kind of polka dot-ish pattern, but it's multicolored and it's more like little short pen strokes kind of. It reminds me of like doodling or sketching, and that was definitely part of my story in this age of my life. So once I've got it heat set, you can see the shininess of the embossing powder, but you can still see the pattern through there. So let's go ahead and pull out the watercolors. I am not using watercolor paints. I'm just going to use my favorite ink pads, which happen to be Concord and Ninth. So I will just smush those down on my glass surface, add a little water, and I've got watercolor. Now normally I wouldn't watercolor paint on regular cardstock because it just soaks in so quickly. But for this technique, I'm just going for a streaky, washy look, so it's not going to matter too much, and I just keep working it until I'm happy with the color. Okay, you can see that as I add this darker color over the top, my title is now starting to pop, and that is where I want to leave this to dry. Magnets on my glass board are very helpful to prevent a lot of warping, and my H there apparently didn't get heat embossed quite enough because part of the H is missing. And honestly, it did bug me at first, but I just kind of let it go and move past it. I did buff off any watercolor that was sitting on top of the glossy surface of the embossing so that the letters themselves would show more brightly against the watercolor. And now I'm creating an embellishment piece, and I'm trying to get my paint even more peachy because as I was working all of this, I thought I need an actual embellishment piece that represents that peachy folder that I mentioned previously. So I set that watercolor aside to dry, and I work on other parts. I am creating the actual banner piece for my title. I clip a fishtail on the end, and then I'm going to score on my paper trimmer, which has a scoring blade on it, at I think 1/4 inch from the tip of that fishtail banner, and then another 1/4 inch, and that will let me fold the fishtail under so that I can pop it up on some foam and give it a little bit of dimension. So there you go. You can see me folding it, and it will pop up just a little bit. And then I realized I did want to do one more thing to this title that I almost forgot about, and that was to outline these titles with the coordinating stamp. So this is an older set, I believe from Lawn Fawn, of coordinating stamp set and die, and it has the outline to the letter, but when I die cut the letters, it becomes the infill of the letter. Hopefully that makes sense. And my StazOn ink pad, which is a permanent ink, which is good for using over embossing the slick surface of embossing powder. It was a little bit dry, so I did have to re-ink it. And then I've got my title going on rather quickly there. Now my next emboss resist is to create that peachy word. And I popped up on the screen that folder that I was referencing. So here I'm going to try and recreate the word peachy using my Versa marker. So it's the same ink as my Versamark embossing ink pad, and there you can see it sticks to the embossing powder just fine, and you can freehand write with a Versa marker. I am doing 2 coats of the embossing powder just to make sure I got good coverage, and then I'm going to go over this with a darker color of watercolor, so the words beneath will stay that kind of orangey yellow color from my first coat, and then the surrounding will end up being that darker color because the embossing powder resists soaking up the watercolor paint. All right, so those are the 2 ways. It's the same technique really, just done with 2 slightly different products. So that gets some of the embellishing and the title work done on here. Now I'm creating some tags. I have a lot of things that I want to add in terms of journaling to this layout because the whole title is just like memories of 5th grade. So I've done this before where I create a layout on one big subject and I leave room to add more journaling to the layout over time. So I'm creating this tag pocket with my photo. I'm creating these particular tags, which I will write on now. And then I can always add more tags, more whatever parts and pieces I want to add to this story later. I made a little oops with my pen as I was outlining things, but here's a little quick tip. Go over it with a white gel marker. As long as your paper is light enough, it will kind of erase that oopsie and make it blend less. Now, if your paper is a darker color, it's not going to be as helpful, but most of the time I'm writing on lighter colored paper, so that works out. Okay, since I had that peachy embellishment that I made, I thought I really need some more 80s stationery school supplies on this layout. So I just went to the internet, downloaded a Trapper Keeper photo and a picture of one of those colorful click pins that had 4 colors in one pin. And if you're of a certain age, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm starting to embellish my layout. Now, this isn't the focus of the layout, so I'm just going to go through this rather quickly, but I'm creating clusters. I'm trying to include some of those 80s elements to each cluster, trying to create a visual triangle and add balance, and then pointing out my bestie here, who, like I said earlier, is Stephanie, and she and I had good times together, and also a little rivalry triangle of friendships in the 6th grade happened, but that is a story for another day. All right, here I am adding a few last bits of embellishing. I did add some little heart pull tabs to my tags, and then I found the word best friend in my kit embellishment, so that was perfect for this layout. If only I had planned it that way, it would have been even better. All right, with a few last elements on there and my journaling in place, I'm calling this layout done. So here is a look at the overall layout and a few still photos for you as I wrap up this process before I come back to say my final goodbyes. So there you have it. That was my watercolor resist technique. What did you think about this layout? Do you have some nostalgia for the 80s like I did when working on this? Drop me a comment and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I will be back soon with more crafty videos, and until then, I hope you have an artful day.